HOA fined me for birdseed, then for mailbox paint. By the fourth month, my dues hit $3,020. What they didn't know, I was their new county auditor. I didn't argue. I built a case. And when the IRS walked in, I was already waiting. Before we deep dive into this interesting story, subscribe to our channel and tell us where are you watching from. Share in the comments below. I didn't move here for a fresh start. I moved here to disappear. After 16 years in forensic accounting, most of it unraveling corporate lies so dense they could have qualified as modern literature, I burned out. The kind of burnout you don't bounce back from with a vacation or a few therapy sessions. Mine was cellular. I didn't just leave my job, I shed it like old skin. So when I stumbled across Willow Creek, tucked behind a line of maples and a tasteful white brick entry sign, it felt like a soft sigh. A planned community with good schools, trimmed hedges, quiet nights. I didn't have kids. I wasn't married. But peace? That was something I was ready to invest in. The HOA brochure called it a harmony-driven community guided by shared values. There were stock photos of golden retrievers, kids on bikes, and one of those block parties with checkered tablecloths and grill smoke curling into the summer air. Maintenance and fairness, the tagline read. After years of tracking fraud across multiple time zones, it sounded like a poem. So I signed. All cash, 3-bedroom colonial, with a red door and a small patch of lawn I could mow in 10 minutes flat. I moved in on a Wednesday. By Saturday, there was a crisp envelope on my doorstep from the HOA. Violation, mailbox paint non-compliant. Shade deviation from approved palette. Blue Shen 402 thin D versus required Blue Shen 402 1B versus required Blue Shen 402 1B. I stared at it for a full minute, waiting for some kind of joke. Then I looked up and saw him, Gary, the HOA president. Early 60s, khakis too stiff, posture like he was always about to issue a citation. He waved with one of those tight, politician-like smiles, the kind that doesn't reach the eyes. Behind him, Linda, the treasurer, stood with a clipboard in hand and a permanent squint like the sun, or her neighbors offended her. They didn't introduce themselves. They didn't have to. Their names were on every policy letter, every laminated flyer on the bulletin board at the mail kiosk. They were Willow Creek's self-appointed royalty, and I had already become a subject of their petty scrutiny. Still, I smiled and nodded. I paid the fine. I even repainted the mailbox, just one Pantone shade darker than my own preference. It wasn't the hill I wanted to die on. But a few things stuck with me. First, the way Linda stared, like she was calculating my threat level based on how promptly I complied. Second, the HOA's quickness to escalate. That first letter, it came by courier, not mail, not regular mail. A courier, for a mailbox paint shade. And third, something I noticed when I passed the community bulletin board. There was a small list posted under delinquent homeowners. 5 names, all marked in red. I later learned those properties were under lien threat for unpaid HOA dues, they said. But something about it felt performative, like a warning, not a report. I hadn't even unpacked half my boxes, but something in my old instincts stirred. The part of me trained to spot irregularities, patterns, quiet fraud beneath loud rules. I tried to push it down. I wasn't here to investigate. I was here to rest. But Willow Creek didn't allow for rest. It allowed for compliance. A week later, another fine arrived for non-uniform grass edging. Then one for unauthorized seasonal decor. A ceramic owl I kept near the steps. I laughed the first time. I frowned the second. By the third, I wasn't laughing. I started keeping a file. Not out of habit. Out of necessity. Because I'd seen systems like this before. And they always smiled before they devoured you. At first I thought it was a clerical error. The HOA invoice that landed in my mailbox just 3 weeks after the mailbox paint fiasco included a $150 charge for something called a trash alignment violation. I'd placed my bin exactly where the diagram in the welcome packet showed, handle facing out, 2 feet from the curb, but apparently the lid wasn't fully flush, whatever that meant. I paid it, not because I agreed, but because I was tired. And I still clung to the illusion that compliance might buy me peace. But the charges kept coming. A $320 fine for unauthorized decorative rock placement. I had arranged 6 smooth river stones beside my front walkway. Apparently, they weren't part of the approved landscaping elements. I was directed to page 47 of the HOA manual, an 86-page document I'd never received a physical copy of, only a link that conveniently no longer worked. I emailed the HOA office. No response. I called the number on the violation letter. Straight to voicemail. I left a message. Then another. Then one more. Nothing. By the 4th month, my running total with the HOA had ballooned to $3,020. The original $400 annual fee, reasonable, expected, was now buried under a pile of obscure charges. Fence paint reflectivity violation. Non-standard hose storage. Excessive birdseed attraction. That last one actually made me laugh out loud. Apparently, the HOA believed I was luring wildlife into the neighborhood. I wasn't late on payments. I wasn't behind on dues. I didn't throw parties or play loud music. I wasn't even sure anyone had seen me enough to complain. But every month, the charges escalated. And every month, I noticed the same pattern. No explanations, no appeal process, just a balance sheet growing like mold. One night, I saw Linda again. HOA treasurer, clipboard always in hand, walking with 2 others along the sidewalk. Flashlights bobbing like searchlights. They were inspecting front lawns under the cover of darkness. That's when it clicked. They weren't managing the community. They were mining it. And fear kept everyone silent. I tried talking to a few neighbors. Casual, low stakes. Hey, have you gotten any weird fees lately? The reactions varied. Nervous laughs, quick subject changes, even one person who whispered, "It's best not to ask questions around here." Another neighbor, an older man named Henry, shook his head and muttered, "They nearly took my house last year. I paid just to make them go away." Make them go away. The phrase stuck in my ribs. That's when I started documenting. Not reacting. Not fighting. Just collecting. I scanned every letter, photographed every violation site before and after compliance. I pulled copies of my payment confirmations, time-stamped every call I made, and quietly, I built a spreadsheet of my own. One that looked eerily like the audit logs I used to maintain in my old life. Row by row, I charted the charges, cross-referenced the rulebook, took screenshots of broken links, recorded conversations on my porch when HOA reps dropped by with more warnings. I stayed polite, calm, invisible, but every interaction pulled another thread. Linda once mentioned, offhandedly, that the HOA had been hiring preferred vendors for landscaping and inspection work. I looked up those companies. Most had websites built in 2012 and never updated. No reviews. No physical addresses. One was registered to a P.O. box 2 towns over. Another to someone named Daryl, who happened to be Gary's nephew. I didn't say a word. Not yet. Because something deeper was starting to take shape. This wasn't just overzealous rule enforcement. It was a revenue machine. And if you dug far enough, it probably led to something criminal. But I couldn't prove it. Not yet. So I played the part. The compliant neighbor. The man with the newly painted mailbox and the birdseed-free lawn. Inside, though, I had flipped a switch I hadn't touched in years. The quiet part of my brain, trained, disciplined, and buried under burnout, had woken up. And it was watching. Closely. I hadn't planned on going back to that part of myself. The one that thrived on irregularities, the one that spoke fluently in discrepancies and buried decimal points. But corruption has a scent. And once you've spent your life around it, you can't unsmell it. It started innocently enough with a request. Under Section 6.3 of the Willow Creek HOA bylaws, any homeowner has the right to request access to financial statements upon written notice. I drafted a clean, professional letter, signed, sealed, and delivered it in person to the HOA office on a rainy Tuesday. 3 days later, I received a single-page spreadsheet. No headers, no breakdown, just vague entries like landscaping, 40, inspection services, general operations, 1 no vendor names, no invoices. Some rows literally said redacted. It was a performance. A bad one. I didn't make a fuss. I just scanned it, logged it, and added it to the growing file I was building in my home office. I figured I'd hit a dead end for now. But then I met Becky. She was walking her dog, a little white mutt with a crooked ear, when we passed each other one afternoon near the retention pond. She gave me a quick glance, then a second longer one. "You're the one who's been getting all the fines, right?" she asked, adjusting her sunglasses. "Apparently," I said. She hesitated, then leaned in slightly. "I used to be on the board, treasurer, before Linda." That got my attention. Her eyes darted around. "Can we talk? Somewhere quiet?" We sat in my backyard. No recording devices, no phones in sight. She was skittish, but she talked, and what she told me rewrote everything. Gary had recruited Linda onto the board 2 years ago, after pushing out the previous president. The two of them had rewritten enforcement protocols, installed an internal vendor list, and began issuing violations at nearly triple the previous frequency. Most of the approved vendors shell companies, controlled by relatives or friends. They made it impossible for anyone on the board to ask questions, she said. If you disagreed, they buried you in ethics complaints until you quit. I asked her why she hadn't come forward. She looked down. "They threatened to file a lien on my house for late dues. I'd just gone through a divorce. I couldn't fight." Then she handed me a small, worn USB drive. I backed everything up, out of fear. I didn't know what to do with it, until now. She left quickly, without saying goodbye. I didn't open the drive right away. I wanted to be methodical, controlled. I closed every blind in the house, powered up an air-gapped laptop I kept for legacy audits, and ran a secure sandbox before plugging it in. What I found nearly knocked the breath out of me. 3 years of full financial records, vendor contracts, payment schedules, internal emails, raw ledger entries, the real books. It was a mess, but it was my kind of mess. Line by line, I dissected it. The landscaping company paid $47,880. It mowed 4 medians twice a month. That's $500 a cut for a job that costs $60 anywhere else. The inspection services vendor, registered to a Shell LLC, owned by Linda's cousin. The general operations line, a revolving slush fund, petty cash reimbursements, equipment upgrades, and a few line items literally labeled board discretion. There were also payment entries labeled special projects tied to no scope of work, no invoices, just requesting 5-figure payouts, sometimes quarterly, sometimes more. But the most damning piece was a thread of internal emails. Gary to Linda. "Make sure the fee structure is dense enough they won't question the small ones. It's about layering pressure, not just revenue." Linda to Gary. "New owner at 1184 has potential. Passive type, pays quickly. Test decorative rock citation, see if he fights." That was me. They weren't just aggressive, they were targeting. I sat there for a long time after that. The laptop still glowing in the dark. The ceiling fan spinning slowly above me. I wasn't even angry. Not yet. Just focused. It had been years since I built a forensic case from scratch. But it was muscle memory. I opened a new spreadsheet, then a second, then a cross-indexed timeline chart. I began linking payments to policies, vendors to board members, violations to timestamps. Every entry got a tag. Every claim got a source. I didn't tell Becky. I didn't talk to neighbors. I didn't file a report. Not yet, because now I knew what I was looking at. This wasn't petty mismanagement. This was structured fraud, and I knew exactly how to bury them with it. But first, I needed access. Real access. And fate, as it turns out, had a sense of humor. Because 3 weeks later, I got a call from the county auditor's office. A regional HOA audit was being piloted due to rising complaints. They were looking for licensed professionals to volunteer as independent compliance auditors. My old certifications were still active. I didn't even hesitate. I submitted my resume that afternoon. I was in. And I had time. The audit protocols allowed for phased reviews. Cooperative entry, they called it. I started slow. Requested general ledgers in accordance with my new role. Asked for copies of contractor licenses and insurance certificates under procedural pretenses. All entirely legal. All within my right. Gary shrugged it off. Linda stalled, of course. claimed she needed to compile the right files. But I didn't push. I let her stew, because every delay was logged. Every excuse cataloged. They were digging their own pit. I was just measuring the depth. The first meeting I attended as an auditor, I sat in the back, unassuming. Clipboard in hand, they didn't even introduce me. Gary was mid-rant about late dues when I asked a casual question. Just out of curiosity, I said, "Is there a vote log for the board's approval of the last landscaping contract?" Gary blinked. "Why?" "Standard compliance check," I said, smiling. "Auditing procedure." His mouth twitched. Linda dropped her pen. I watched the color drain from their faces, like someone had flipped a switch. They recovered fast. These types always do. But it was already there. The fear, the shit. They couldn't bully me. They couldn't find me. And worst of all, they couldn't stop me. Because now I had legal authority, I had state and county backing, and I had evidence. But I wasn't interested in flashy moves. Not yet. I wanted to make sure when they fell hard. So I began building timelines, public payments, cross-referenced with vendor activity, photos time-stamped against falsified reports, maintenance invoices for work that never happened. Neighbors started whispering. Not to me, but near me. I heard my name in hushed tones, caught sidelong glances at the mailbox kiosk. People were curious, hopeful maybe. They didn't know yet, but something had changed. The board still pretended nothing was wrong. They smiled too tightly, held meetings with performative efficiency, but their margins were shrinking. Their paperwork had to match. Their vendors had to answer. Every document they filed went through me now, and I saw everything. It was a strange feeling, power. Not the loud kind, but the silent leverage that comes from knowing exactly how and when to pull the trigger. I wasn't there yet, but I was close. And they knew it. I had been quiet for too long, and they started to notice. At first, it was small things, barely distinguishable from the usual HOA pettiness. A new $75 fee for improper porch lighting. A $95 noise ordinance violation issued while I was out of town. Fines that didn't make sense, backed by grainy photos and timestamps that didn't match reality. But this wasn't just enforcement anymore. It was targeting. Gary and Linda had ruled this neighborhood through a cocktail of intimidation and ambiguity. Most people caved quickly, paid without question, avoided the meetings, avoided the drama, avoided the fallout, but I hadn't broken. I hadn't begged. I hadn't even raised my voice. And that terrified them. Because people like Gary don't fear noise. They fear silence. And I was very, very silent. The letters started arriving differently now. Certified mail, everyone signed with unnecessary flourish, like they were trying to leave fingerprints on every piece of paper. One envelope had 3 violations stapled together with a sticky note clipped to the top. Refusal to comply with HOA requests constitutes willful negligence. Further inaction will result in lien placement and foreclosure review. I read it once, then again slower. Foreclosure review. Over what? Birdseed and mailbox paint. I didn't respond. I logged it. Photographed the envelope. Scanned the contents. Dated and timestamped everything. A week later, I got a notice posted on my front door. Neighbors saw it. A bright yellow sheet, laminated, accusing me of creating a hostile atmosphere toward elected board members, and warning of potential trespassing charges if I engaged in further disruptive conduct. I hadn't said a word to them in weeks. I hadn't set foot near their office. But they were spinning a story and laying the groundwork for something darker. At the next community meeting, they made their move. It was held in the clubhouse's multi-purpose room, beneath buzzing fluorescents and the smell of old coffee. Maybe 24 residents showed up. More than usual, word had been getting around. People sensed tension, though they couldn't quite name it. Gary stood at the front like a man auditioning for local office. Tie too tight, voice too smooth. Unfortunately, he began, some individuals in our community have taken it upon themselves to obstruct board operations. We've received reports of harassment, stalking, even threats. He didn't say my name. He didn't have to. Linda sat beside him, eyes cold, lips pressed into a line. She held up a folder. "We're documenting everything," she said. Everything. I didn't speak. Didn't flinch, just sat in the third row, recording on my phone beneath a legal pad. They had no proof, no incident reports, no witness statements, just vague accusations. Manufactured noise. But it was calculated. They were trying to isolate me to discredit me before I could act. I let them talk. Let them spin. Then I stood up. Not to speak, just to leave. I felt the eyes on my back as I walked out, slow and steady. That was fine. Let them wonder. Let them panic. Because by then, my report to the county auditor's office was 80% complete. My files had grown into a full investigative brief, cross-referenced, documented, categorized, every fine, every violation, every vendor transaction, every meeting transcript. I'd even begun building a visual timeline. Every charge mapped against financial transactions and HOA policy changes. The overlaps were obvious. Predictable, even. But what I wanted more than proof was pattern. And now I had it. Still, I stayed quiet. Even when I found out they'd gone door to door, spreading whispers about me. Unstable. Obsessive. Trying to dismantle the HOA. One neighbor told me they were warned I had a criminal background. Another said Gary had implied I was under investigation myself. It was pure fiction. But it had one goal: smear and isolate. I let it happen. Because they didn't know I was forwarding every new violation, every threatening letter, every secondhand rumor to my county liaison. And that liaison was already building a case for full regional oversight, not just on my HOA, but the surrounding 5 as well. The deeper they dug, the wider the hole got. And all I had to do was keep collecting. Because they thought I was playing defense. They had no idea I'd already fired the first shot. It happened on a Monday. The kind of crisp, clear morning where the air smells like clean linen and the birdsong feels choreographed. I wore a navy blue suit, pressed and spotless, paired with a county-issued badge clipped neatly to my belt. In one hand, a leather folio. In the other, a sealed audit envelope bearing the county seal. By 8 a.m., every HOA board member had received it. Subject: Official Notice of Comprehensive Financial Compliance Audit. Jurisdiction: Willow Creek Community Association. Assigned auditor: They didn't believe it. Not at first. Linda called the county office within the hour, her voice apparently cracking somewhere between disbelief and fury. But the answer was the same from every department contact. Yes, the audit is real. Yes, your assigned auditor has full jurisdiction. No, you may not request a reassignment. By 9:15 a.m., I was standing at the HOA office door. Gary answered, in khakis, of course. He opened the door halfway, then froze when he saw me. Morning, I said. As of today, I'm no longer your neighbor. I'm your auditor. I let the silence stretch until he stepped back. The office smelled of old air freshener and something faintly synthetic, cover-up scents. I walked in without hesitation, nodded to Linda, who was pale and blinking too often, and took the seat at the head of the conference table. I placed the folio down with precision and opened it, revealing 3 pre-stamped folders labeled Vendor Relations, Financial Disbursements, Bylaw Enforcement Activity. Each tab had at least a dozen cross-referenced documents. This is a Phase 1 review, I said evenly. I'll be conducting interviews, verifying contractor compliance, and reconciling financial records with reported HOA activities. No one spoke. Not at first. Then Gary forced a smile. Surely there's been a mistake. It's highly inappropriate for you to perform a job I'm legally authorized and certified to do. I interjected, locking eyes with him. You'll want to be careful what you suggest, Mr. President. Interfering with a county audit carries consequences. I watched his Adam's apple jump. I started with the vendor logs. By noon, I'd issued formal requests for all contractor agreements, payment proofs, and service reports from the past 36 months. I flagged 6 vendors on the spot for failing to match any state registration databases. 2 of them were clearly linked to Linda's cousin. She didn't deny it. She just stayed quiet and looked away. By the next morning, I had a small folding desk set up in the HOA office. I wasn't going anywhere. I began pulling transaction logs from their accounts, which they were now legally required to provide. I brought in a forensic software kit, fully county approved, and mirrored their systems. And once the accounts were mirrored, I froze 2 of them. Not entirely, just enough to prevent further vendor payments or internal transfers without written justification and prior approval. That set the panic in motion. Gary called an emergency executive meeting at the clubhouse. I let it happen and showed up 5 minutes early. Residents were gathering in the hallway, whispers bouncing like static electricity off the walls. What's going on? Is it true the board is under audit? I heard 2 vendors walked off the job this morning. People were starting to smell the rot. Inside the meeting, I made it clear, all enforcement actions were now subject to external oversight. All fines issued in the past 6 months were to be reviewed for legality. All contractor relationships had to be verified and reapproved. Linda protested, called it overreach. I handed her the municipal codebook and highlighted 3 sections confirming my authority. Gary fumbled with a folder full of invoices. I asked him to explain why the landscaping contractor billed $4,200 for trimming 6 bushes behind the rec center. He stammered something about premium services and vendor discretion. I just wrote the word embezzlement in my notes and let him see it. The day after that, a group of residents gathered outside the office, some with folded arms, others just watching. One woman, Janice, a longtime homeowner, who'd once been publicly shamed for a hanging planter, nodded at me as I passed. "You're the one doing this?" she asked softly. "I am." Her voice cracked. "Good." By the end of the week, 2 of the preferred vendors had quietly dissolved their LLCs. One tried to invoice for final services rendered. I rejected it and forwarded it to the county attorney's office. My liaison responded with a single sentence: "Proceed with escalation." I added a new section to the audit folder: criminal referrals. The dominoes were tipping, one slow push at a time. But I wasn't rushing it. I wasn't here to scare them. I was here to bury them with receipts. The room was packed. I'd never seen the Willow Creek Community Center this full, not for barbecues, not for Halloween raffles, not even for the annual budget vote. Every chair was filled. People stood shoulder to shoulder along the walls, murmuring, waiting. Curious eyes darted toward the front of the room where a projection screen was being set up. At exactly 7:00 p.m., I walked in, not through the back door like a neighbor, but down the center aisle with a county seal embroidered on my lapel and a steel gray presentation case in hand. Gary stood near the podium, pretending not to look rattled. Linda sat beside him, pale and stiff, clutching a binder like a flotation device. They hadn't canceled the meeting. That was their mistake. The moment I stepped to the mic, the room shifted. A low hush fell like a blanket over the crowd. "Good evening," I said calmly. "As many of you are aware, my name is redacted, and I've been conducting a financial compliance audit of the Willow Creek HOA for the past 6 weeks. A beat of silence. "I'd like to walk you through what I found." I tapped the remote and the projector screen lit up. Slide 1, unauthorized vendor contract. 6 companies with no business registration, 4 linked by name, phone number, or banking details to board members' relatives. $174,000 paid out over 2 years for services never rendered. Gasps. Slide 2, inflated fine revenue. Total HOA income from violations, $213,780. 74% of those fines issued to just 16 homes. 11 of those homes had requested financial records or filed complaints. Murmurs began. Angry ones. Slide 3, board compensation violations. Stipends paid monthly to board members. Undocumented, illegal under current bylaws. $42,000 cumulatively funneled through general operations entries. Linda received meeting appearance fees for sessions she never attended. A hand went up in the crowd. Then another. Then a voice from the back. "Is that legal?" "No," I said. "It's fraud." People turned to each other, whispering now with heat. The back row was already pulling out their phones. Then came the final slide. Summary: misappropriation of funds and criminal referrals. Vendor kickbacks. Forged inspection reports. Unapproved disbursements. Active referral to the county attorney's office. IRS flagged filings sent for federal review. It was like someone had lit a fuse. Gary lunged for the microphone. "This is a smear campaign. None of this has been verified. This man he's got a personal vendetta. He's not even a certified forensic auditor." I cut in smoothly. holding up my county-issued ID. Because I am, and everything I've presented tonight has already been submitted, verified, and logged by the county auditor's office. Linda stood up then, as if to steady him, but something cracked in her face. She wasn't backing him. She was sliding away. I didn't know about all of it, she said weakly, not meeting his eyes. Gary handled the vendors. I just signed what he told me to. Now the crowd wasn't whispering. They were shouting. He lied to us. I lost my house. You fined me for having a wreath. People stood, demanded answers. Some clutched envelopes. Others waved photos or printouts. Years of fear and forced compliance were unraveling in real time. Gary stammered, turned red. He reached for the binder, flipping through it blindly. We did what we thought was best. For who? Someone yelled. That's when it happened. Quiet Janice, with the hanging planter violation, stepped forward and slammed her return receipt copy of a $1,200 landscaping fine onto the podium. You stole from us, she said, her voice shaking, and you're going to pay. A pause. Then someone clapped. Then another. Then the room erupted into full, cathartic applause. Not for me, not just yet, but for truth. The board was done, shattered. 2 members, non-officers, resigned on the spot. Gary backed away from the mic. Linda sat down, limp. Their power had drained not with a fight, but with a floodlight. I stood there for one last moment, watching the crowd transform. They weren't afraid anymore. They were awake. The predator had become the exhibit. And I had handed them the glass. Sometimes, it comes with sealed federal folders and a quiet man in a navy suit. And sometimes, if you're patient enough, it comes with receipts. I repainted the mailbox last weekend. Royal blue, not HOA approved. Not even close. I picked the boldest shade the hardware war carried, rich, defiant, almost luminous in the afternoon light. No citations arrived, no warning letters, no clipboard inspections under the cover of dusk. The new board doesn't operate like that. After the audit fallout, the neighborhood had a special election. 3 longtime residents ran unopposed. Real people: Henry from the corner lot, Janice with the planter. Even the single mom who once got fined for sidewalk chalk. They didn't run on promises. They ran on memory. They remembered what it had been like to live under constant watch, and more importantly, they remembered who stood up first. I didn't run. I didn't need to. They ask for my advice sometimes. Sure. I'll help review contracts, proof a budget, quietly, from the sidelines. It's better that way. Peace has returned to Willow Creek. But it's not the passive, brittle kind that crumbles under power. It's real now. Earned. There are still rules, of course. But they make sense. And if someone steps out of line, there's a process, not a punishment. People wave at me now. Not the tight, suspicious nods from those early months. These waves are grateful, open, they say. You did something we couldn't. Most won't say it out loud, they don't have to. I walk my dog each evening past the old HOA office. The lights are dim these days. No more constant foot traffic, no more secretive board emergency meetings. Just a small room with peeling beige trim and a broken bulletin board still displaying outdated notices. Sometimes I smile. They thought I was just another homeowner, a burned-out man with a blue mailbox and a quiet demeanor. They didn't know I had once exposed a Fortune 500 company's offshore laundering chain, or that I once found a $2.4 million discrepancy buried under a fake paper supply company in Delaware. They didn't know I was born for audits. The difference is, I used to do it for shareholders. Now I do it for people who hang flags on their porches and grow lavender in repurposed wine barrels. That matters more. A week after Linda's arrest, I got a call from another HOA 2 towns over. Then another. Then a quiet email from a paralegal in the city asking if I'd be willing to consult unofficially. I never advertised, never asked. But word travels. They still don't know I helped 3 other HOAs clean house this past year. Each one just as rotten. Each one toppled by silence, patience, and spreadsheets. I don't do it for money. I do it because no one expects it. And because sometimes it's nice to see fear in the eyes of people who used to weaponize rules. Back at home, the grass is a little too long. My porch light is too warm, and there's a ceramic owl guarding my steps again. No fines, no drama. The mailbox stands tall, that bold royal blue catching sunlight like a badge of quiet defiance. Burnout didn't break me, it just rerouted me. Now I walk softer but carry something sharper than outrage. Evidence. My neighbors are no longer afraid. And me, I sleep just fine. Because the system tried to audit me, but I got there first. Ever wondered what happens when the quiet neighbor holds all the receipts? This wasn't just justice, it was strategy, sealed and notarized. If you've ever been fined for a flag, a flower pot, or a bird feeder, you're not alone. And trust me, we're just getting started.